Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about VCT Masters Tokyo and trying to predict who will win the tournament. This will be the second international tournament of the year for Valorant and the first after the regular season splits. So lock-in being more of just a showcase tournament, while still very important and still a very good tournament, this will be the first one of the regular format that we will have going forward in VCT. They did announce the seedings for the group stage today, but I'm not going to be talking about that today. I will be making a pick'ems video about that. But for today, I figured that we would take a look at each team and see if we can make an argument for each of these teams being able to win the tournament. So what I've done on this slide here is I have shown every team that has made it, obviously, shown their regular season record, their best player in terms of average combat score. So unfortunately, that does mean that most of the players that are showcased on the board are Jet players, but that's just how that stat works out. And, you know, a lot of Jet players are seen as the best players on their team because they get all the kills, but that's not always the case. And I also wanted to showcase one very good map from each team, looking at the record on the map and how they do percentage-wise on attack and defense. Anyway, with all that said, let's get right into it. First off, we're talking about Loud, who were the runner-ups to win in lock-in, just losing in a very insane grand finals and unfortunately not being able to win on home turf. So they will be looking to right the wrongs. Unfortunately, there is a thing in Valorant called the second place curse, where the second place team in one tournament does poorly in the next. The same happened to Loud, actually. They were grand finalists in Reykjavik in 2022, and then they did very poorly in Masters Copenhagen. But if there's any team that can break that curse, I think it's Loud. They had an 8-1 record this season, looking very dominant in a very crazy Americas League. And despite losing to NRG in the regular season, they were able to beat them in the grand finals to be able to start in the playoff stage, while NRG has to start in the group stage. So looking at their best player by average combat score, we have Aspas, who, even aside from the average combat score, I think you can absolutely make an argument that he is the best player on that team and potentially the best player in the world. His KD ratio sits at 1.46, which tops the Americas League, and he has an average combat score of 246, which again is top of the Americas. So Aspas being a very dynamic, very powerful, very good Jet player, and if they're going to do well in this tournament, it's going to be thanks to him partially. But that's not the only good player on their team. They have such a deep roster. They are an insanely good team, potentially the best in the world. And looking at their best map, it is undoubtedly, undeniably Haven. Loud have not lost on Haven since Iceland Reykjavik 2022, so the very first tournament of last year. They have a 5-0 record in the VCT Americas on it, attack 67% and defense 52. So while I have the regular season records up, the stats for the players and maps will be combined, both regular season and playoffs, just so we're clear on that. But yeah, as I said, Loud just look incredibly dominant on Haven. They cannot be stopped on that map. They're undoubtedly the best in the world on that map. So we'll see. They have a lot to prove after losing in lock-in. You know, they lost on home turf. The crowd was behind them. They almost had an insane comeback, and then fnatic just locked it down. So I think they're going to be coming in with a lot to prove and a lot to say. And now moving on to the second seed in the Americas League, we have NRG, a team that has looked highly inconsistent in both the regular season and playoffs. They did get their act together after losing to Evil Geniuses, and they did end up making it to Masters Tokyo. In the regular season, they had a record of 6-3, placing third in the Americas going into playoffs. And the team that is built up of the Optic core plus Som and Artis, again, they've looked pretty inconsistent and not as solid as that Optic roster, but I'm not entirely surprised at that. They don't have VA and they don't have Marved, but Artist, while he's been very frustrating at times from the perspective of a fan of this team, he has shown up in times where he's needed and has proven that NRG did make a pretty decent choice signing him on. But their best player, I would say, in both average combat score and just in general, is Victor. Victor has a KD ratio of 1.11, so maybe a little bit lower than you would hope, but he does have an average combat score of 218. He's still an extremely solid player, and those numbers did dip a bit because of the losses that they had in the playoffs, but he's still an extremely effective player and potentially the best flex player in the entire world. And looking at their best map statistically, we have Bind. In the Americas League, they had a 4-1 record on it. Attack is 54%, defense is 59%. And they only lost on that map against Loud in the grand finals of the Americas playoffs. So if it wasn't for Loud being Loud, they would probably have an undefeated record on it. And yeah, NRG, I don't know if they have it this tournament. I do think this roster may need a little bit more time in the oven to be able to win an international tournament. While they have shown a lot of resilience resilience that Optic roster had, being able to be very good in rematches. And I just don't really see them taking a tournament after the season that they've had. It's been very up and down. But hey, if there's any teams that I think can go on a decently surprising run, it is Energy. If they can put it all together, they have a decent chance, but we will see. Then we get to probably the most surprising team on this board. We have Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses is a team that seemingly came out of nowhere. They are the lowest seed in this entire tournament. They have a negative record in the regular season with 4-5, and they were the 6th seed coming into playoffs. Again, just showcasing how insane the Americas League is, where there was like 4 teams that had a 4-5 record, and they just happened to have a tiebreaker over Sentinels and 100 Thieves. So they barely squeak into playoffs, and then they beat Energy and Cloud9, 2 of the best teams in North America. Energy did win the rematch against them, so there is that aspect of it, but they did look really good in those playoffs. Unfortunately for Evil Geniuses, they will be without their best player in Demon 1. He absolutely would have been on the board. He has been one of the best players in the entire Americas League and really just dragged this team to a playoff spot. But unfortunately, he does not have a visa, so he will not be able to attend. So the next best player in terms of average combat score is Busio, who is also their IGL. He has a KD ratio of 1.01 and average combat score per map of 205. And their best map is Fracture. They have a 5-2 record on it. Attack is 63% and defense is 58%. If this team had Demon 1, I probably would have bet on them at least making it past the group stage. They are playing FUT for this first match, so another team that kind of surprised a lot of people by being able to make it. I just really don't see EG being able to be as dominant as they were in the Americas playoffs in Tokyo. When you're missing your best player, it's kind of hard to make an argument for you being able to really do some damage in these playoffs. So unfortunately, I'm going to underrate them again, and we'll see. Maybe they can play with the same kind of structure that they had with Demon 1, just without him, but I just don't really see it happening. And now we move on to the teams in the Pacific League. Topping off the list, we have Paper Rex. Ever since making it to the grand finals of VCT Masters Copenhagen, Paper Rex have had a very up and down year, but it looks like their roster is ready to do some damage. They did have a 2-2 start to the regular season, but they recovered since then and had a 7-2 record, and then pretty much ran through every team in playoffs. And this is partially thanks to the star who came from out of town, Something. He has a KD ratio of 1.36 and an average combat score of 230. And he came in after the team was struggling again. They had a 2-2 start, and they did not do well in Lock-in, losing their only match. They also didn't have a good placement in Champions 2022, so something needed to change about this roster, and unfortunately Benkai was the casualty. Benkai was a player who was hailed as one of the best IGLs in Valorant coming into 2023. He had a bad end to 2022, but it looked like, maybe he can find that same Copenhagen magic. Unfortunately, it just hasn't happened, and one of the funniest happy-go-lucky guys in Valorant will probably not be playing during this tournament, and that is unfortunate, but the team's been winning without him, and you don't mess up a winning lineup, especially when the team has been performing as good as they have. And now it seems like Forsaken has been taking over the IGL duties, while every player has been trying to help call, and this team's best map statistically is Pearl. They have a 5-1 record, attack win percentage is 54%, and defense win percentage is 55%. So a team that looked like they were at least the second best team in the Pacific League. They were able to beat DRX in the playoffs to take the #1 seed. They did lose the first 2 maps of that grand finals, but then they reverse swept DRX in a pretty impressive win. I like their chances this time. I really hope that a Pacific team does eventually win an international tournament. It has not happened yet, and it's just going to depend on who they're facing in the bracket and if they can overcome. Next off, we have a team that I was pretty surprised wasn't the #1 seed in Pacific, and that is DRX. DRX had an 8-1 record, only losing to Team Secret in the regular season. As I said, they did lose to Paper X twice in playoffs, so they were not able to get the #1 spot, but they did look very, very dominant throughout the entire year, so they still made it. It's not a huge deal that they lost at grand finals. Maybe they were saving some strats and some maps for Tokyo, so we'll see if that's the case. Foxy9 is the player highlighted. He has a KD ratio of 1.1 and average combat score of 229. And their best map is Split. They have a 5-0 record, attack win percentage 61%, defense win percentage 62%. So both pretty good numbers there. And DRX, as I've said before, they kind of feel like the next fnatic, where fnatic always came into tournaments looking like the best in the world, or looking very good at least, and then they just weren't able to get over the hump for a very long time. Could this be the tournament where that changes for DRX? Because it's a very similar story. They haven't made it to grand finals, but they've gone very, very close at least twice now. So they've looked super good. I really hope they can win a tournament. This is where the rubber meets the road for them, because this is a very, very important tournament for this team. If they can show that they can do it, because they can be dominant in their own league, but that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. What matters is winning an international tournament. They also didn't win the tournament in their own Pacific League, so they're really hoping that they can win one here. Next up, we have the very last seed of the Pacific League, and that is T1. T1 had a 6-3 record, placing 3rd in the Pacific League. Saya player who came over from the guard in the offseason has been very, very good for them. He has a KD ratio of 1.25 and average combat score per map of 236. In terms of average combat score per map, he has been the best player in the Pacific League, so he's looked very good since coming over from North America. One thing about T1 is they don't really have a map that they're super dominant on. I did put Fracture on the board. They have a 6-3 record. Their attack win percentage is 53% and defense win percentage is 54%. So that is a cause of concern when it comes to T1. Is their map pool deep enough to get them far in an international tournament? We will see. I think they have a decent chance, but I just don't see it for this core right now, but maybe eventually. And then we are moving on to the EMEA teams. The region that many believe, mostly Europeans, is the best region in all of Valorant. It has been a very, very competitive league so far, and we're going to see which one of these teams is truly, truly the best in the region when it comes to this tournament. And the playoffs for this region were also pretty wacky too. Team Liquid did end up taking the first spot despite being 3rd in the league with a 6-3 record. And the player on the board is Safe. He has a KD ratio of 1.34 and average combat score of 247. So very good numbers from Safe, being their Jet player. Their best map is Split. They have a 6-1 record on it. Attack win percentage is 68%, which is very good, and a defense win percentage of 56, which is about average for your positive maps. I do think that this Team Liquid is a lot deeper than the team that we had before, and very, very well has a chance to get over the hump in this tournament, and a team that I think has a pretty good chance of making it to at least a grand finals in this tournament. Team Liquid haven't had a ton of success in Valorant so far. They had a pretty similar roster for 2021 and 2022, and while I really wanted Scream to get one, he just could not win a tournament with that core. But now we have a much deeper team. It's a team with an amalgamation of players from the Gambit roster, some players that they already had, and some decent other additions. And it's worked out pretty well so far. It looked maybe a little bit rockier early in the season, but they got their stuff together and they looked very, very good. And of course, beating fnatic, who went undefeated the entire regular season in the grand finals of the playoffs. Very impressive work from them. I think they have a pretty good shot. Next up, perfect segue, fnatic. Now, fnatic. 9-0 record. They went undefeated. The only team that went undefeated during the regular season in all 3 VCT leagues, looking like the best in the world, looking dominant. And then, in classic fnatic fashion, they lose in the grand final. Now, it's not a super big deal that they didn't win in the grand finals of their league playoffs. It is kind of funny that after finally getting over the hump in lock-in, they kind of went back to their old fnatic ways of losing in grand finals after looking very good. But, you know, fnatic does fnatic things, but I do think that the narrative around this team absolutely is a lot more positive than it was before lock-in. The player I have on the board for them is Durka, who I think is undeniably their best player. His KD ratio is 1.3. He has an average combat score of 268, which I believe is the best on the board. So in a league with this much talent, Durka just rises above the rest and has an extremely good stat line. And their best map is Lotus. They have an 8-0 record going undefeated on that map. Attack win percentage is 73%, which I think is the best on the board as well. And they have a defense win percentage of 53% on that map. So again, they're coming in looking like the best in the world. They are in playoffs. They are not doing group stage, even though they lost to Team Liquid in the final. They do secure that spot because of their lock-in win. So I'll be very interested to see if they can once again get over the hump and win an international tournament. There are people who talk about lock-in like it was like a Mickey Mouse tournament, a tournament that was just there to showcase all the teams, and it doesn't really matter because, you know, there wasn't double elimination. It wasn't as hard as other tournaments, and Fnatic have still not won in a tournament with a regular format. And part of me hopes that they shut that narrative down and win, but part of me also doesn't want back-to-back winners. I like it when it's a new winner every time, and we've never seen back-to-back wins for a team in a VCT international tournament. So I do think that they're capable of doing it, but they've been capable in the past and haven't been able to get over the hump. But they finally did in lock-in. They can probably do it again in Tokyo. Next up, we have another very surprising team that is here. We have FUT Esports. They had a very impressive playoffs. They had a 5-4 record in the regular season, so they were the 5th seed, so the second lowest seed coming into this tournament. The player I have highlighted is QW1. He has a KD ratio of 1.23 and an average combat score per map of 219. And the best map is Haven. They have a 4-1 record. Attack win percentage is 65%. Defense win percentage is 54%. So pretty good number on attack, a more average number on defense, but still pretty good. FUT, I do think, is kind of coming out of nowhere. They are a Turkish team, and they looked decent during the regular season and then looked surprisingly good during the playoffs, beating out NAVI for that number 3 spot. So NAVI will have to participate in the LCQ to be able to make champions, because that's what happens to the 4th seed because of Fnatic getting an extra slot for the EMEA because of their win and lock-in. So that puts NAVI in not a great position and FUT in a very good position. They don't have to worry about LCQ. They will be in champions. So a pretty surprising team. I do like it when random teams come out of nowhere, and that does seem to happen in EMEA a lot, where just a random team pops up and has some pretty good upset victories. I remember Guild in Master Rank Fit in 2022 beating a lot of my favorite teams and really annoying me, but they did lose that tournament, so gotcha. But FUT Esports, they are not the same team, but they will be facing Evil Geniuses for their first map, so 2 pretty surprising teams playing there. They can do it, but I don't know if I see it. I don't know how the roster is going to shake up versus some of the other top teams from other regions, but crazier things have happened, and we'll see how they do. Next up, we have a team that I personally was expecting a lot more from, and that is NAVI. NAVI being the roster that was FPX last year, and with the addition of CNED when Artis went to Energy. A team that looked very dominant during the regular season, 7-2 record, being the 2nd place team in EMEA. They ended up not having a very good playoff, so they were in a different league, or if Fnatic didn't have that extra spot for EMEA, they would not currently be in VCT Masters Tokyo. They lost 2-0 to Team Liquid in the playoffs, and then they did beat Giants Gaming, but then they lost to FUT 2-0. So while FUT did look pretty good in that, NAVI not even being able to take a map and not really make it that close, pretty concerning for a roster that I expected a lot more from coming into the season. But they do squeak in. They will be in the group stage. They will be facing Energy for that match, but it is concerning that they weren't able to beat a team in FUT that they should have beat, and Liquid's much better, so that is more excusable, but they were better than them in the regular season, so they should have been able to win that one. For their highlighted player, I have CNED. He had a KD ratio of 1.14, an average combat score per map of 223, so definitely proving some doubters wrong. He didn't have a great 2022. The Ascend team, after winning the very first champions of Valorant, they did not have a good 2022, and the roster fell apart pretty quickly. But CNED showing that he wasn't the problem there, and looking like, again, one of the best players in the entire VCT. Very good jet player there. Really excited to see what he can do. Their best map is Pearl. They have a 4-0 record. Attack percentage is 57%. Defense is 44%. So while they do have an undefeated record on that map, that defense record is really not good. Having one side below 50% on a map that you win on makes it seem like your wins are kind of lucky, but you know, they are still a pretty good team, so we do expect them to be better. So those are all the partnered teams that will be participating in Masters Tokyo, but it would be bad of me to not mention the teams that are coming in from China. China does not have its own VCT league, but they did have a tournament to allow 2 of these teams to make it into the tournament. I don't really expect these teams to go far, but again, it would be bad of me to not mention them in this video. First off, we have Attacking Soul Esports. I don't have a record of these teams on it because they just ran through like tournaments and they won the tournament, so they don't really have a regular season record to go off of. The player I highlighted is Light, who had a KD ratio of 1.15, an average combat score of 251, and this was in the 2nd split of the tournament that they had to go through to make it here. Their best map is Fracture. They have a 2-1 record in that split. Attack win percentage is 61, defense is 47. And then we have Edward Gaming, who have made appearances in international tournaments before and haven't looked terrible, but also just not good enough to really do a lot of damage. For their highlighted player, we have Zimjik. I think that's, I don't know how you say that. He has a KD ratio of 1.32, average comment score per map 264. So pretty good numbers from both of the highlighted players from this team. But granted, this isn't against the same competition that the rest of the teams have been facing. Their best map is Haven. They have a 4-0 record on it. Attack win percentage 71%, defense 81%, which is the highest on the board technically, but again, you're not facing the same kind of competition that you would be facing in this tournament. Just before we end this now quite long video, we do have the region records that I want to go through. So this is just looking at which regions have performed the best in these tournaments. I just wanted to look at who's made it to grand finals and who has won the most. First off, we have the North American region. They have been to 4 grand finals and they have won 2 of them, one of them being Optic, the other being Sentinels. Optic have made it to 3 different grand finals. They did make it as NAVI in 2021, losing to Gambit. And as much as a lot of Europeans like to say that NA sucks, they've had pretty good success in Valorant so far. So, you know, they haven't always been the best in CSGO, but they do have a pretty good record in Valorant so far. But EMEA undoubtedly do have the better record. They have made it to 5 grand finals, 4 wins in those, so they win most of the time that they're in grand finals. Granted, one of those wins and 2 of the grand final appearances are from Gambit, who were technically in the CIS region, but that currently does not exist in the VCT because of the whole, you know, Russia invading Ukraine thing. But alas, EMEA have won most of the time when they make it to grand finals, but not every time. Next up, we have Brazil, who've made it to 3 grand finals, all of that being Loud, and they have won once. And then the Pacific region, which I just counted as just all the Asian teams, they've been to 1 grand final, and that was Paper X, and they lost that one, so they've never won an international tournament. So if we really want to get into the conversation of which region is the best, if we look at the stats, it is EMEA, but NA is very close behind. And looking at these records, it does show kind of how each of these regions work. NA has a lot of talent, can go on some really impressive runs, but they aren't always as solid as other teams that they face and maybe get a little bit cocky and end up losing. Overall, they do have some really good talent that is able to go on some really impressive runs. And maybe NA is a bit more top heavy from other regions. That is kind of what I've seen from even the Americas League, even though that is a combination of NA, Brazil, LATAM, doesn't matter. If we're just looking at just the entire history of Valorant, NA historically has been a little top heavy, having some teams that can be the best in the world, but the teams below them aren't really the same tier as maybe some of the lower teams in other regions. So while NA is top heavy, EMEA I think has a lot of talent just spread out. They're definitely not as top heavy. The competition is a lot tighter in there. Brazil is extremely top heavy. They only have 1 team representing them in this region, and that's kind of been the story just for Brazil in general. You know, they've had Furia make it to international tournaments. They've had Team Vikings. They've had, what was that? Vivo Keyed. They've had them, but Loud has been the only one to actually look dominant. I did get a comment on a predictions video about me underrating South America. It's not that I underrate them, it's just for that tournament, for that was the America's playoffs pick'ems. For that, I did just predict that Energy would do a little bit better than Loud, but I was mostly expecting me to be wrong on that and Loud to be able to win that tournament. And it's not that I want to underrate South American teams. I have a lot of respect for those teams, but historically they've been a little top heavy, where they've had some very good, very talented teams, but the teams below them haven't always been the best. Furia is a decent team, but they didn't make it here, and they did kind of have a collapse after having a good start to the season. Same with MIBR, decent start, bad finish, didn't make playoffs. And the Latin American teams, they're not even here. They are not representing their own region in this tournament. They will not be here. And it's kind of the same thing there. They are a bit top heavy, have some very talented teams, but their talent pool just isn't as deep as other regions. It's no shade. It's just kind of how it's worked. Would I love to be proven wrong? Absolutely. But that's just kind of what I see. And then with the Pacific teams, a little similar to EMEA, where they have talent a bit more spread out, and they aren't as top heavy, but they just haven't been able to get over the hump. None of these teams have won an international tournament, but can they do it? Absolutely. Anyways, that is all for today. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know which one of these teams you think will win VCT Masters Tokyo. I think it's going to be an absolutely insane tournament with a lot of talent being showcased, and I do expect me to be wrong on a lot of the things I'm saying, but also hopefully right. I like being right, but you know, I'll take being wrong sometimes. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.